Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this is just a one-on-one talk with myself and Tim Easley. It's been sort of themed as personal branding, and we've just been quickly talking then before we let you guys in about, in a very sort of short way about what that means, because we're not too sure ourselves, are we, Tim? I think that's the whole point really of this conversation. It's the first time we've done something along these lines, and it really came about because I've seen Tim's work online, and also his sort of promotional shots or behind the scenes sort of type of images. I just really wanted to sort of talk to Tim, and hopefully anybody that's tuning in that's interested in this topic and maybe looking to do it themselves or thinking about personal branding, because it's become such a common topic shared, especially on things like LinkedIn. People talk about it a lot, and there's a new wave of entrepreneurs, of business owners that seem to be positioning themselves to have a sort of maybe a subsidiary, or this is part of who they are, and they've got a business to the side of it. So it's just a really interesting topic. But before we get into the more specifics about yourself and the subject, Tim, could you just let us all know a bit more about you, just a little bit of a background about your career today, just paint a picture of who you are.
Yeah, well, I'm Tim. I'm an illustrator and designer. Like I mostly end up doing illustration now. A bit of branding on the side and stuff. I didn't really start off doing creative things. I sort of fell into it a little bit over the years, but that's what I do now. And yeah, I've been doing that like freelance for like the last 15 years ish. That's probably sums it up quite well.
Amazing. So, so when you say you focus mainly on illustration, has that come through a sort of a push personally, or is it because of, when I look at, say, your Instagram page, it's obviously very, very, very visual, but it's so colourful, and it's heavily, in more recent times, what I've noticed seems to be a lot of illustrative work, but there's still obviously a clear graphic brand driven focus in there. Does that work come about through the way that you put yourself out there?
Yeah, I mean, when you do freelance, you end up putting yourself out there for like quite a lot of different things. I've done design work like over the last 5 years or so. I've done design work, I've done illustration, I've done photography work as well. But then the more work you get in something, the more work you get in something. So if you end up getting a bit more illustration work, you end up putting that up a little bit more, and then that's what people think you do mostly, and then you get more of that work. So it's kind of over the last 5 years, it's funneled into illustration. That's kind of mostly what I get now. Like I say, I do some branding every now and then, but it's not like massive projects or anything. Like most of it's illustration work, and it is because it's not necessarily because I'm looking for it. It's just that's what ends up coming along to you. Like if that's the work that you're putting up and showing to everyone, then that's kind of what people want to pay you for.
Yeah. That's included quite a sort of healthy list of pretty big brands I've noticed, and some of the in your bios, and obviously some of the work. Is that again sort of a lot of that you attract other clients because of obviously what you're doing, but you find that some of those clients just continue to retain you and use you for other projects within the same business?
Sometimes I think in the illustration world, they like to kind of switch up quite a lot. So you'll do work for someone for like Foot Locker. I've done work for them over like a few years, and then they'll switch to other people. They've got so many stores, so like they'll use different. They can't use the same person in every store around the world for like 10 years or so, can they? So they'll switch it up a lot, and then you'll end up doing a bit of work for a different client for a little while, and then they'll use someone else. I think it would be boring if like companies use exactly the same illustrator all the time. Obviously, they can use the same designers. So I think if you're doing graphic design, you probably retain clients a bit longer. Illustration, they will come back to you like every now and then, but you won't tend to work for the same person all the time.
Yeah, I've had quite a few different types of people speaking about that. We do predominantly sort of naturally focus towards branding and design and agencies and studios. But in recent times, we've looked more at strategy and copywriting, language, lots of different areas that make up the whole industry. I know people like Matt Voice and Craig Black on in the past. And I've always wondered if there's a concern that because you sort of focus on a certain style, because that's just who you are, it's natural to the way that you work. Is there ever a concern that you worry that you become lost in all the noise? Because illustration has become huge, hasn't it, in the last few years? And branding, agencies are using it a lot for for brand identities, especially for younger startup businesses. Do you ever get concerned that maybe someone, they just find something new all the time. And there's just a continual stream of people, and you feel a little bit lost and outdated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how it works most of the time. I think when you get a little bit better known, companies will see work that you've done for one company and then say that they kind of want the same thing. It's not because like people are lazy or anything. It's just that it takes a long time. People are quite busy. It takes a long time if you want to go on like Behance or Instagram and you want to like start scraping through. It's really hard to find like lesser known people on social media now. It's normally the same people that stand out a lot. So I think people end up having like a list of illustrators they want to work with over the next few years. And it's generally the same sort of people that have been working with other brands, just because that shows up on people's feeds a lot. And like I'll if I go on my Instagram, I'll go on my explore feed and it'll be like quite a few of the same people pop up all the time. And I guess like then you would just like get used to their work and you like it and you write them down. Um, so yeah, I think yeah, like companies do end up using the same people quite a lot, but that's good. That's good if they end up using you though.
But especially from a diversity perspective, it's good for the consumer, but also the individuals themselves as illustrators and artists. I suppose it keeps you on your toes, doesn't it? Makes you keep on creating and sort of pushing yourself to sort of be, to evolve and change things and sort of stay relevant. I suppose that's everybody's ambition, isn't it? But I think there's
Yeah,
there seems to be quite a lot of great agents now, like Handsome Frank, and I think Raw. There seems to be really proactively trying to get people in front of clients, and it seems to be a much healthier place than what I seem to remember it when I started. So that's obviously great, and I think also that diversity in design in general, really freshens up what could be sometimes quite stale when you've just got some of the traditional uses of the craft. When you introduce illustrators into that and collaborations in different formats, animation, all these different things, it really sort of it takes it forward another level, and hopefully the industry keeps on going that way. That sort of brings us on nicely, really, to the idea of this talk about personal branding. Is because of that noise and that competition. When I look at your feed, like I say, go back to Instagram is always the easiest one because it's so visual.
Mhm.
There isn't just a flood of work, as it looks like it's quite curated positioning of things to sort of give us an insight into who you are. So it's not just about the output; it's much more about what's behind that, which I think is fascinating because I think it's a really important part of our industry, and more people need to do that. I think more people are doing that. Is that a concerted effort to show people what's behind the work and who you are and your studio and the things that the park the things that we can see now that you're into as a person? Is that an effort that you made consciously to give us an insight into your work?
Yeah. I mean, like a long time ago, I didn't like to use to show my face on the internet or anything like that. Like a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of illustrators like that. They'll use like a little illustrated picture of them on their profile rather than their photo. And I think gradually you end up figuring out that brands kind of like to have someone as like a person working for them and not just like a sort of faceless entity in a way. And I think it kind of showing your personality kind of shows that sort of what you're an expert in and kind of what sort of things you're into. So there was definitely like an effort to put up some of my kind of photos of my studio and stuff. I think yeah, to show like who I am and what sort of things I'm into. I think it puts some of my work in context a little bit. Um, it wasn't like I didn't like my studio and stuff. I didn't arrange my shelves or anything to go onto Instagram or anything like that. It was sort of pre-existing anyway. But I think it's nice. It's nice to see who's behind the account a little bit. Um, I do like it. Like it's decent to see just people's work, but it is nice to kind of see a bit of their process. Or if they can't show their process because maybe they can't be bothered to film it, or like me, or like it's not like massively interesting or whatever, then it's nice to kind of see a little bit more behind the scenes stuff, I think. And then that ends up, yeah, bringing a little bit of like the personal branding in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite I don't particularly like the phrase personal brand. I think it's sort of been created for the purpose of just making it something that it probably, or it was already there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's existed for decades since people have been around. You know, Pele and Muhammad Ali were you know they were a brand, weren't they? And quite sort of think about it the way that we do now. But was there a turning point for sort of a little bit like myself? Like the idea of being on camera and sort of showing yourself to the wider world, you sort of makes me a little bit repulsed by the idea. But sometimes you sort of feel like you have to do it because it's to achieve what you want to achieve. It's you have to break down those barriers of personal, overcome personal fears, etc. Was there a turning point for you that you thought, well, this is the right time to do that, as somebody that probably wouldn't traditionally do that?
I think the time when I decided to put my face on my profiles was, I don't even remember. I'm so bad with like dates and times and all that. But like, I went into the BBC to do some work with them, like for a few weeks, like years ago, on the BBC Three rebrand, and they got me in there. And when I got in there, I realized that none of them knew what I looked like, because I had a photo of me like holding up this like frame with a drawing of me in it. So like you couldn't see my face. And when I got in there, like none of them really knew who I was. I got into reception, I got my like security card and all that done, and someone came down and picked me up and like didn't know who I was. So I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should kind of put my actual photo up there. And then once you've done that, like it ends up not being so weird to have your picture up there, and then you end up putting a few more up. And there's also a lot of like the last few years, let's say, said just before we kind of came on properly, was that there's a lot of like personalities now on social media, like rather than just like people doing work and then showing themselves as people who are coming on as personalities, kind of like mini celebrities, I guess. In a way, I think it's the whole YouTube thing where people like watching YouTube because it's kind of they can interact with someone, but it kind of feels like a celebrity in a little way. And I think so. There's now a lot of people who do like introduction posts and put a photo of themselves and their work and all that, and like talk a bit more personally about themselves. I think people enjoy that rather than just seeing loads and loads of someone's work coming up. They kind of like to know a little bit more about someone.
Yeah, 'cause I remember when I first started, I think the idea of being quite anonymous was a bit of a trend, as personal branding is now. That was quite
Mhm.
it's quite a done thing, you know. It was about the work and the craft. You know, designers went and sat in a dark room and then sort of posted their work to an account manager, and they showed it to the client. You know, it was it was a bit of a different sort of space we were in then. And I think some of that there's quite a merge, isn't there, from graphic design to illustration and art. There's a sort of like, they're very defined crafts, but they're also very loosely linked in some sort of way. So things like
Mhm.
art, like people like Banksy, for instance, that whole brand is about anonymity, isn't it? It's about we don't know who he is. I think as soon as you find out, even if it isn't man or woman, you found out, I think you everyone just wouldn't be interested anymore. But it's the idea
Yeah,
that you don't know, which is quite fascinating compared to, like, say, what we're discussing now. Is all about knowing people. It's about going behind the studio doors. It's about sort of seeing the process. It's about understanding the personality, the identity, you know, their interests away from the work, which somehow it creates much more of an interest than, like you say, just a stream of work, which I think also with the introduction of things like AI, there is also the idea that maybe personal branding is now essential because we need to actually know and define that there is somebody behind that, as opposed to
yeah,
a machine creating this sort of stuff. We were just saying beforehand about those two differences that you mentioned there about, you know, people that are maybe creating an identity or persona which is comes alive when the camera's on, compared to what I thought for yourself was much more of an extension of who you are. Is that true? Is my analysis of that correct? All the things that we see about your studios, the things that we see in the images, the background, the shelving, the items, it's all just things that you're into, isn't it?
yeah. It's just stuff I've collected over the last many decades or whatever. Yeah, and I think there is like a little split now between like people are kind of showing stuff behind the scenes and then people are kind of turn into like personalities. Um, and I don't mean like in a fake way where someone's like being fake on camera or whatever. It's just that they kind of, I think like we talked for a second before we came on about it's not maybe if you're watching people like do like tutorials and all that kind of thing on their Instagram, you don't want them to be like, okay, and you click here and you do this. You want it to be a bit quicker, and you need like a little bit of personality going into that. So there's a lot of people who kind of ramp up their normal personality a bit to kind of be more interesting, and just the same way like actors would, or like, and anyone would who was like on TV. When you're on a mini version of TV, you phone, you kind of, I think people want to see someone being a bit more interested in that. Like they don't want to see like an hour long of someone working in Illustrator. They want to see like 30 seconds cut really quickly, someone kind of sounded a bit more interesting. So there definitely is that. And yeah, the other side of people who are just kind of showing a bit of behind the scenes, which I don't know, I find like both of them like equally kind of interesting. I don't feel like, so for me, like I don't have the type of personality I could like ramp it up and like become like a big personality and start doing that sort of thing. I'd feel really weird doing that. So I don't mind, kind of my version is, yeah, just to show people stuff in my studio or just other bits I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I suppose you got to just find that happy medium, what works for you, haven't you? So like some people have that persona where they can be very presenter driven, you know, they can sort of engage a room for a long time. You know, people that do public speaking, you know, some people can do that, can't they? They can hold the room, they can make people listen and engage in it, and others struggle with that. But I don't think sometimes there's a bit of a blur there as well. Expectations that people think that they need to be the same as others that are successful at that. But there's, I think, proof that you can find that in a way that works for you.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to be like a big personality on things. It works for some people. I've seen a decent amount of people on Instagram, like you talked about Matt Boyce, like he doesn't do that sort of thing on his Instagram, but because he works like quite quickly with a lot of clients, so like he's got a lot of work to put up and it's engaging by itself. So I don't think he needs to do that sort of thing on that. And there's other people obviously who, like when you do illustration work, you sometimes maybe are working on something for a few weeks and you don't have stuff to put up every day. You can't just keep making things every day because you've got like other work on that you'll show at the end of that. And I think sometimes then it's useful for people, maybe like if you've got the personality type, to be able to show a bit of your process in between and like ramp up the personality a little bit and get something interesting put out there. Or people like me who'll just work behind the scenes and not post for like 3 weeks and then put something up when you finished. I think it works as long as you've got the right kind of people following you, and the people who like commission you and want to like get you in on projects or like watching what you're doing. I think it works fine.
I think personally, I've seen from afar, I think it's the authenticity part which is the key to it. And people, excuse me, people that maybe are doing it for reasons because there's maybe a social pressure to do it, there's peer pressure, there's many alternative reasons. Maybe they just want to grow a following. They make, it could be a lot of reasons. But if it's not done for the correct reason, I think it soon dips and it stops, and the interest grows. Finding that, being proud to show your reality, I think is the key to that. It's something that you can then uphold that for a long period of time, can't you? Because it isn't just, it's not like we're going back to, like, say, your background. It's not a backdrop, I should say. It's not like it's a preordained set where you have to take it all apart and you use it to eat the dinner on. You have to reassemble it. It's just there. It exists, in the real world. So if you do decide to sort of show somebody behind the scenes, maybe downtime between projects, it just evolves, doesn't it? It's not a completely different set, so to speak. And that's really important, to be honest about who you are.
Yeah, and I think having like the pre kind of built set and stuff is fine for some people. Like a lot of YouTubers will do that. They'll have a room that they set up in and they'll make a background that looks nice, get the lighting done, all that kind of stuff. And that works well because like their type of personal branding is like their personality, and like they've got to do a set. It's like a TV studio, isn't it? So they've got to do a set that they do things on. I think when you're like, my type of personal branding is more just showing people what I'm doing a little bit and just getting on with things by myself, and then kind of letting people into that a little bit and posting some work. And then I think there's the mid ground kind of between that, where someone will kind of work on things but also think of doing like behind the scenes videos and like filming reels and like editing those at the same time. I don't really have the energy for that particularly. I know a lot of people do really well with it, but I think like you have to do it really consistently, and you need to have the personality type where you kind of really enjoy making those videos and talking over the top of them, and you've got like the energy for it. And yeah.
Well, putting us both in the same category, I'm too old to do that sort of stuff. So I feel that it's disconnected from that world. But do you feel like there's as somebody that's maybe done it for a while and worked in the industry for quite a while, that there's now pressure on people coming into the industry to sort of immediately do these things, to sort of be part of that, this sort of industry that because of social media, we've sort of self-created this endless cycle of sort of trying to put ourselves above the noise and to be seen. Those expectations are maybe just getting a bit extreme for younger people.
There definitely is a pressure, because like I've noticed with a lot of illustration work over the last few years, like, and this makes a lot of sense if you're thinking of it from like the client side, is that they're kind of quite interested in having people with like big followings and who make reels and have personalities and stuff doing the illustration work, because they get the extra benefit of having someone that'll make like kind of extra content around the work that they're doing. And they often will, because like I've been paid a little bit sometimes to do that sort of thing, like make a little reel or like a behind the scenes thing. I'll take a few pictures of what I'm doing. And so like it works well for the illustrators that do that sort of thing. But I think it's quite a big trend at the moment for clients to kind of need that along with it. Like they kind of want someone that has like 100,000 followers on Instagram who'll be able to kind of pop their head up in their picture as well and kind of talk about the work that they're doing and make it look a bit more interesting. So I think there is the pressure for like people to start doing that. And I guess if you're like established already, you don't really have to think about that. But if you're just starting out, you're just out of uni, or like you're just starting your career in some way, I think there is that kind of pressure to like build up your followers and be able to kind of offer that alongside just doing the actual illustrations. You need to have your personality popping up with everything as well.
Yeah, it's a difficult. I can't imagine what it'd be like starting again. I find it quite. It must have been the same, I think, when we were first going, not to this extreme, because obviously social wasn't quite as popular. We don't think it even existed actually when I started, but there were other pressures in other sort of areas. But I think it was quite naive at the time. I think it must be quite daunting to step into the arena now, and especially you can so easily see the whole world as well, can't you? So you didn't really have that privilege back then. It was quite sheltered from what was going on in even other parts of the country, let alone around the world. So it was a different. When you talk about engagement, do you notice a difference in engagement when you post things about yourself compared to work, or have you got to a point where it's pretty level?
Yeah. if I post a picture with my shelves, but I'm not, then I had my shelves in my studio and I moved in with my girlfriend, and now I bought like a little bit of stuff with me, not too much because there's no space. I would have filled up the whole flat with stuff. But I think when I post pictures with my shelves, they get a lot more engagement. I think just because there's a lot happening. So when people scroll past it on Instagram, they look at it and they want to ask questions about it. I think when like you post your work, it's just someone sees like a nice image, they'll like it. They don't necessarily interact with it too much. So yeah, I do notice a difference if I post a picture of myself. Like if I put all my work on like little postcards and put a picture of them with my shelves behind, I'd probably get a lot more engagement on everything. Weirdly.
That must be really good though, because it generates conversations maybe with people that wouldn't normally see your work or maybe feel comfortable talking to you, because if it's just professional based or work based, it's very specific, like I say, to a certain project or business. But seeing your world, that will open up a lot. Because when I saw, in a sort of very materialistic, naive sort of way, I saw the Chinatown balls and something I'm personally interested in. So it's just sort of like, oh, right, yeah. So you sort of then start to look a little bit deeper. And it's a bit like one of those sort of Where's Wally sort of type things. You start to see little things that, you find personal interest in. But if I'm doing that, there must be like millions of other people doing the same. And that could open up conversations with people that you might not know where or who they work with. And it could be a client, it could be associated with a brand.
Yeah, and I think with my stuff in particular, I think with probably with everyone else that's got a studio and has got like knickknacks behind them all the time. I think because the stuff that I've got on my shelves is stuff that I'm interested in, and it's like from companies that I would like to work with, or it's like it's a similar kind of thing to the work that I do. I think it gets people interested who might be potential clients or who are just interested in similar things, and that's always a good thing. And like you say, it gets the net out there like a little bit wider and kind of brings some more people in. Especially with like Instagram and all that, like just not showing anyone's work to anyone nowadays. Like if you get a post that gets like a lot of interaction, even if it's just because, like say, everyone's doing a Where's Wally and kind of zooming in and having a look, I think it's good. It brings everyone in, and they might have a look at some of the rest of your work and like bookmark you for like a project late down the line. I've definitely had a couple of clients that have come along because they've seen my shelves or my studio or something else that I'm interested in, have then kind of got me to do some work for them.
Yeah, I was speaking to an agency. We were looking at agencies further than the UK recently. I spoke to a first, we're in Stockholm, I think, or Copenhagen, and they were saying that they do a little bit of the personal sort of side of things, but that really opens doors in terms of their values and what they're working towards as an agency is quite sort of specific to their things about sustainability and all those sorts of areas about the planet that needs to be addressed. And that really helps them connect with businesses as opposed to just sort of trying to pitch for tenders or soullessly sort of trying to find work. They were finding it in spaces because they taught, again, going back to authenticity, they were talking about it from how they genuinely feel about wanting to change certain things. And if you were, say, advising anybody else, would that be, you were mentioning there about the things that you were generally interested in and the businesses that you would like to work with because of those interests. If you were sort of trying to say to anybody else, talking to them or advising them about the idea of personal branding, would that be one of the core messages to try and tick, or boxes to tick, sorry?
Yeah, I think so, because like with all the stuff that I kind of collect and I'm interested in, obviously that's stuff that I'm interested in, and I'd like to work with those types of brands and work doing those types of things. So it's good to show that you kind of maybe like what you're talking about a bit in that fit in whatever field it is that you're kind of showing. It's good. I think then brands kind of know that I've been involved in like the sneaker industry for like a long time. So if someone like a brand comes to me like Nike or Foot Locker, they know that they're not going to have to just explain things to me. That if they talk to me about what they want, I'll know like about their customer base. I'll know about like what they do and like what will be kind of cool to do for them and what wouldn't be cool, and like what to avoid and what to put in. So I think it's really good to show that sort of thing, because they, like say, they'll know that you know what you're talking about, basically. And also it brings in work for like places that you want to work for. Like nobody's going to come to me with like football work, for example. I've got no interest in football. I don't say that on my Instagram. I've got nothing to do with that on my shelves. So like, I think it funnels the right type of clients into you, I think.
Yeah. Do you then find that, is there anything where when you step that into the real world, sort of talking with clients, when you actually meet face to face or however that interaction works, is there ever any need to uphold a certain sort of personality or the way that you are? Or again, does that just seamlessly happen because it just generally is who you are? Because I was just thinking as you were saying that, when we were talking about the sort of two differences, and I would say there's no right or wrong with either. They're both valid and they've both got a place. But if one is a little bit more preordained for camera, when you're in the real world, that might not always be the reality, depending on how good a day you're having, what might have gone on in your personal life. That sort of I think there's sometimes the idea of celebrity, that veil sometimes slips, doesn't it? And we've seen that quite a lot in the public
Yeah.
eye recently. But if you are being dead authentic and genuine, like, you just carry that through on a day-to-day basis, so that you don't ever have any the idea that anybody says, "Oh, you're not quite like what I expected," or it's is it just who you are when you're in the real world as well? That's just that quite seamless relationship with a client. You don't need to sort of worry about being anything that you're not.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, people might expect me to be a bit like louder or talk a lot more. Because I mean, I don't put up like videos of myself a lot, so like, I don't think anyone's expecting me to sound like what I do on like reels of videos or anything, because I don't really put them up. And I think if you've got like an account that's based on like having a big personality and all that kind of thing, it might be the case when you meet like fans maybe that they might be expecting that personality. But I think clients know that maybe you're like a normal person behind the scenes and you ramp it up for the videos slightly. I think they're just, as long as they get that same energy when you do stuff for them, I think they're not too bothered. I think that like when I've met people that are like that who've got like a big personality on their Instagram, they're always a lot more calm in real life, because it would be weird if they're like wrapped up all the time and just you wouldn't be able to have a conversation with them, would you? So I don't think anyone's like expecting that all the time. I think it works out fine.
Quite intense, wouldn't it? If it was, and everyone was like dead, it'd be a bit too much.
Yeah.
So looking at or thinking about challenges that you've faced, again, I think for you it's probably a little bit different, because it's so obviously, or it's become so obviously genuine that this is just who you are. It's just this is everything that we see is just an extension of your life, basically. And illustration is just a part of that. And I think like most creatives, that we don't ever really leave it the 9 to 5 doesn't particularly exist, does it? We just do it all the time. You just immerse yourself in these worlds. You go on holiday, you find yourself attracted to some sort of street art or gallery, or some place that's cultural or creative or independent. It's just, you can't really change much about that. But have you found any challenges you faced when you started to open up more about the background and yourself, and, your identity, your personality?
Um, I don't think so much. I think people are like quite nice, especially in the illustration world. Everyone's like very polite. There's no, I know, like maybe in some like other scenes, like you get a little bit of like a clash of personalities and things. But yeah, I haven't found like, I find that like the illustration world and like most of the creative world is quite polite, at least on like social media. Like I've never had any like weird responses to anything. I don't have any like rude comments that I have to delete ever. No weird DMs, nothing like that. No, I think also because like I'm not putting myself out there as like a big personality or anything, so I don't think there's anything to kind of grate on people too much. Hopefully, like, but I think if you're just putting up some pictures of, like your workspace, and I mean the most that anyone's ever asked me or like complain about is like saying that my shelves must be really dusty, but that's about that's about it. Like asking how I dust them, I think that's like probably as bad as it gets.
If that's the worst flack you get on social media, you're doing pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah.
How dusty are your shelves? Also, from a motivation perspective, how does and that sort of crosses way beyond what we're talking about as the theme for this conversation. But from a a motivational perspective, do you struggle with that? Is from a the sort of requirements to uphold certain standards, or do you just do it at a time that works for you when you're right and ready?
Yeah, like obviously client work you have to work on when it comes in and kind of get that done like nice and quick. Personal work, oh, because so like I have autism and ADHD, and like they both make me work like really intensely for like a period of time, and then just get kind of stuck for a little period of time. And like I'm able to work around that with client stuff and kind of get on with it. But like with personal things, I won't do anything for like a couple of weeks, and then suddenly in like a week I'll do like a month's worth of work. So that's generally how things go for me. I'll get like really inspired to do things and then like run through it really quickly. I know that's not how everyone kind of does it. I'll work for like 16 hours in a day or something, and then not for like the next week.
No, I know I'd shared something with you a while ago that we touched upon ADHD. And it was a very short conversation. Well, it was run by a guy called Daniel Edwards, who's in the process. Who recently, relatively recently, been diagnosed. He said answered a lot of questions from his past about what was going on, and now looking to set up a neurodivergent agency specifically, which is a great sort of mission to have. But it's something we really want to touch upon in future a lot more. Well, explore each of those nuances, but again, going back to relatability, need people that have experience it as opposed to me just ticking boxes. So it's something that definitely, like I said, there seems to be so many topics we need to explore. It gets more and more as it goes on. But I think, that's really common, isn't it? That short burst of, of a huge amount of work and then that crash, where you just have to have that time away.
Yeah.
Maybe we hopefully get to a point where things like that are celebrated for what they are, as opposed to being stigmatized. They should be people that from all sorts of different cultures, backgrounds, heritages, suffering from different things. We can all be proud to be who we are, but as a wider industry, we celebrate that as opposed to maybe seeing that as a barrier or a syndrome, whatever people categorise it as. It'd be really interesting to sort of have that as a positive, and as a thing that drives the quality of the work and the reason why it exists, etc., etc. But yeah, I think for like those challenges, I always think it's an interesting one, really. Whether it's whether it's individually motivation, whether it's like a psychological thing, whether it's something like ADHD where you can actually categorise, or whether it's just that sort of the burden and the pressure of things like social media really sort of can disable quite a lot of people to sort of be fearful of that.
Yeah.
And from a professional, I think that's why a lot of accounts probably do just have a lot of work or polished case studies, because it's sort of like this psychological idea of putting your best foot forward, as opposed to actually sharing behind the scenes and the mess ups and the things that left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, the things that clients reject, the things that you just scribbled down in the middle of the night when you're waking up in a cold sweat. I think there's something really quite endearing to that myself, and that's why I think personal branding is probably not the right phrase for it, but just sort of showing people the reality of your working processes and methods is something really healthy, I think. But
Yeah, I mean, so I think the problem with social media a little bit now, like Instagram in particular, is that it's more of a portfolio than just posting up a load of stuff. I like stories definitely helps that, because you can put like behind the scenes things on there and just take a picture of a sketch and all that kind of thing. And you can check them on your story highlights. So that's fine. But I think, it's weird sometimes to maybe post like a load of your work and then like a random sketch in the middle, like something that's not very polished, because a lot of clients are going on Instagram rather than your website to see what you're about and what your work is about. And I think, it's hard to do that, but then obviously you can put behind the scenes stuff in the right kind of place. And obviously on like Twitter and like obviously Threads now, you can post up that sort of thing a little bit more. I think it's definitely like a place for it, and it is nice to see that kind of thing, especially when it's like an artist or a designer or something that you follow and you only see their polished work most of the time. When you actually see how they start out with sketches, it's like quite interesting. Like a lot of my lettering work will be like, if I just put up the finished stuff, it'll look like quite polished, but I might start out doing a sketch about like an inch high and just like really crap, and it looks terrible, and then you end up doing like a load of different versions of it. It's nice to see that. I don't put up enough of that stuff either. But I think also when it's client work, like the client doesn't really want you to put up like the really horrible, terrible version of the work that you started out with.
I suppose it all boils down to what you use these platforms for, isn't it? The primary reason is to generate more work, then I suppose the tendency is to show what the perfect outcome and how you've that case to be ready website sort of type portfolio piece, which is for brands that aren't in the creative world. They're looking into commission somebody. I suppose that's what they want to see, isn't it? But if if you use these things, and maybe you have to have a little bit of a thought beforehand about how you use them to interact. And we tend to use strategy, which makes it very serious, but it sort of is a strategy in some senses. If you're happy to sort of show much more about the process and what goes on a daily basis, or from internally from a studio, and I think that tends to be the privy of studios that are well established already and probably have quite a healthy bank account and client list. Now, then it's a great way to do that. I know people like Dix and Maxie is an agency where they've been going a long time, they're very well respected and established. But they do a lot of that, they sort of show the team, they sort of show the ideas, the concepts, all these sorts of things. But I think if you were relatively new and starting out, you don't have that wealth of material, you don't have a team, then you tend to fall maybe into the trap of showing the perfect work. But then you get very self-conscious, you start to delete it, and you try and then create, especially something like Instagram, to be something that it isn't. You sort of maybe showing a bit of a false persona. Yeah. But things like that, Threads, I'm starting to sort of look at it more. It seems to be at the moment quite a fun place to be. It can be quite, a lot of conversations, questions being asked, a lot of brands being a little bit daft, which is great at times, and sort of not taking themselves too seriously. So maybe all of these places can be used differently to fill different needs, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that should have just been a tab on Instagram. It would have been nice to just have a little conversational tab on Instagram. But yeah, it's working out quite well like that. And like you say, when you got like a big brand, when they're like really well established already, and they've got like a massive portfolio, like work that's really polished, it's easy for them to like post up little sketches and stuff like that, because nobody's going to take that as finished work. Because I've had that problem with clients before, is I've sent them like a sketch. I've literally told them like, oh, this is a sketch, it's the rough, this is like first version, it's in pencil, I've just scanned it, and they'll come back saying, oh, it looks a bit rough, could we like get the lines tidied up? And I think that's the problem if you're not a big agency, is like some of the stuff can get misunderstood a little bit. I think with like a big brand, nobody's going to misunderstand that, because they're not going to them like randomly. They know who they are and they know what their work is already.
Yeah, and a lot of time they probably would have taken a lot of those clients with them on multiple projects and multiple where they've moved roles. Like you can take marketing managers, they'll take the same agencies with you, and etc. etc. So there's already a lot of trust and respect there. So it's not like they're just dipping their toe into the water for the first time with something. They already know what they're about. And I think also there's a lot of the studios or freelancers or people that work alone, that a lot of the time when it can look like they're just throwing stuff online, but I think there's also still quite a lot of thought. And I know a couple of brands that work in the creative space, they're not studios, but they're sort of third-party suppliers, that they go through quite heavy meetings to plan out the type of out there. And even that content could look quite basic in what it is when you see it for the first time on something like Instagram. There has been a hell of a lot of conversation had about how this is going to paint a picture of us, etc. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it goes to show that there's a lot of ways of approaching it. I think it's really about sort of trying to find a place that you're most comfortable in first, as opposed to maybe what anybody else is thinking.
Yeah, you definitely need to be comfortable with what you're doing. But also, you also need to start getting, like, sadly, you have to get really serious about things, because I think you can get serious and not take it too serious at the same time. Like you can as long as you kind of separate them in your brain a little bit, you think like, okay, if you want to grow your following on Instagram, or you want to start like getting the right type of people in, it's okay to have like a content schedule and kind of figure out what you want to post, but then not just have that as it's just there. It's just your diary. Like if you've got a diary, like for an itinerary, let's say for a holiday, you're not taking the holiday really seriously. But you've sat down and planned it, and then you can have fun when you're actually on holiday. And I think you can do the same thing, kind of plan out a content schedules, just so you've got it sitting there and you know kind of what you need to post. And you don't even have to have it like every few days. You could have like, I'll post once a month, plan it out like that, and then have fun now that you've got the framework. and not worry about it too much. I think you can fall into getting mega serious about both sides of it, planning your content schedule, and then getting really serious about thinking about what type of work you need to get out there and like what's going to attract everyone. And I've found that like I can't really plan that in any way whatsoever. People will just pick some random thing that they're really impressed by or interested in on my feed, and that's it. There's no way of predicting it.
Yeah, I think it's best to, my advice would be post stuff and then run. Don't start scrolling because you're there for hours. I was on to it yesterday and I ended up looking at Mr. Tumble singing Cigarettes and Alcohol by Oasis. It's like, where's that come from? How did that happen? It's completely irrelevant to what I was doing, but it did make me laugh for a minute or two. From the perspective of looking towards the future for as a personal brand, I think we're probably quickly realizing that it's just an extension of who you are, as opposed to it being a personal brand. Seems everything now. I've mentioned it quite a few times. It feels ever so impersonal, and probably the reverse of what you do. Where do you see that heading for you? Is it much more of the same? Do you have an idea of where you're going to be taking it, or is it just an evolving reflection of your world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. I think, let's say, I'm not the type of old that'll start making a load of videos with me getting real, like gesticulating a load and like chatting loudly on them and talking about my process and all that. So, I mean, for me, it will probably just stay how it is. But also, I think because I've got the client base and like I don't really need to reach them so much by doing that type of thing. I do get clients sometimes now asking a little bit more for like behind the scenes stuff. I'm kind of happy to do that sort of thing, but obviously I just make sure they know that it's going to fit into like what I have in my feed already. I'm not going to suddenly jump up and start dancing and stuff on like reels or anything. But yeah, I think it's fine as long as, like you said before, like consistency is good. Like and I think as long as you're being like genuine and consistent, even if like being genuine is like having a bit of personality on there, it's like fine because it's just a bit more interesting to watch, isn't it? Like say like actors don't act like people talk in real life, so they speak a bit different, and that's why it's like nice to watch a movie and not like you can watch a conversation in a movie, but like hearing people talk in a coffee shop might not be as interesting.
Yeah. But I think that again, that's probably where we're sort of subconsciously becoming, we're figuring out the definition between the two of being who you are in real life, but just sharing that online, compared to the people that have maybe created a persona.
Mm.
I think the key difference maybe is that those guys will always follow the trends that are being set by the sort of influencers within that field, as opposed to people that are being authentic are just will just be basically sharing their lives, whatever stage they're at. You can do what you're doing in 10 years' time. Your background, which is part of your aesthetic, I think is one way of putting it, will evolve because you will purchase new things and you'll change it up and you might be in the house.
It's big.
Yeah, but that's the thing that evolves, isn't it? Is the interests that you have and anybody else that takes that approach, compared to, like I say, to the ones that are maybe more of a work within a set or have a script or however they work. It's like saying with something like YouTube that there seems to be quite a style that follows a lot of those, that gaming industry, for instance. Our daughter is watches a lot of those sort of videos, and there seems to be quite a similar sort of aesthetic across the board. And it's trend driven, and maybe that's what that is. It's based upon the technology that's available. It's based upon what people's tastes and what people, the influential people within that market, dictate. I suppose that's what the big definition is, isn't it? Is that you've got something that's set and standardised, but something on the other side of that which is highly unique. And why we attach ourselves to those sort of things, because they're similar sort of people. Like what you like are some of the things that I like. So generally drawn to you, or the algorithm will show you more of that type of thing because you've liked it in the past. So I don't suppose there really is any need to evolve or change anything. It is and always will be just a reflection of who you are.
Yeah, I think the only way maybe things might evolve is just with different platforms. I think like Threads obviously is like the newest one, and you can put a lot more images on there than you can on, say, Twitter, and it comes up a different way as than it does on Instagram. There's more of like a chat going on there, so like that might influence kind of how I might present some work on there, like yeah, the conversation going. But besides that, yeah, I don't think I would change. I don't think I would like change my personality, or I mean, I probably couldn't. It would be hard for me to start doing, like I said, like the videos when you're dancing around or doing like quick cuts and stuff. I don't have the energy to go like editing loads of videos.
That's why I think I quite like that Threads. I mean, I don't spend a huge amount of time on there, but I think it's what it does if you sort of maybe overanalyze it, and I have a tendency to do that quite a lot. But with Instagram being such a visual platform, and sometimes the engagement from a conversation perspective is it can be quite short, little quick replies. Something like Threads, I agree, it could be a tab or something a lot more seamless. I mean, it's not too hard to navigate between the two, but it could be a little bit quicker. But the whole idea is that maybe you go from understanding much more about a personality from a visual perspective, you can actually feel like you're speaking to them, which is also obviously a huge part of personality. So you can sort of, the way that they use language, or the way that their tone is, or the way they interact, whether it's fun, serious, inquisitive, entertaining, all those sorts of things. There's a whole new spectrum of sort of to drill down on sort of people that you like being around or associated with or following. It goes beyond, Instagram's traditional use of being a visual portfolio sort of place, and we've all experienced that, the downturn and that, haven't we? So maybe that's sort of, it's the opposite side. It's a reflection of that, isn't it? It's much more about the way that we interact with followers or communities, brands, clients, whatever it might be.
Yeah, hopefully that keeps going, because it's nice. I still feel like Twitter kind of lost that a little bit. In Instagram, obviously, you do get engagement, but they hide most of it, don't they? When you're scrolling down your feed, you only see like a little tiny bit of it. So it's nice to have like a platform where maybe you'll interact a little bit more. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what other kind of apps there are in like 5 years' time, and what actually ends up happening. Maybe people will change. I mean, when TikTok came along, everyone changed how they were kind of presenting all their stuff, didn't they? And like Instagram has put reels on there, and now there's like loads of video content. And I hated it at first, but now I quite like scrolling through it. I think there's just a time and a place for when I enjoy that, as opposed to like scrolling through images, or yeah, like reading conversations and stuff.
Yeah, I suppose all of these things, hopefully everybody can find it. There's not one right or wrong, is there? Everybody finds something that they like using and they feel comfortable with it. And there's a place where they can build a community around that, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it? But that's been a very fast hour, Tim. I mean, I've just nearly at 12 o'clock. That's I say that every week. If anybody's watched this regularly, they hear me say that quite a lot. I really appreciate your time. It's opened up the door for more conversations, which these are supposed to we're supposed to answer things during these things. We always end up with more questions and more head scratching at the end of it. So it'd be really interesting to continue this conversation with other people that are, that are within that space, and maybe people that don't realise that they are creating a personal brand, but from the outside, it feels like they are. So I really appreciate your time, Tim. It was great to speak to you, and obviously speak
Yeah,
to
you too.